Right. Are we live? Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you are there to join us for this wonderful event that we planned for you for today. This is the Spirit of Yorkshire Day celebratory festival day. That'd be a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah. We'll just go with Yorkshire Whiskey Yorkshire Day.
Yeah, as if we need an excuse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So my name is Eddie Ludlow. I'll be your host for today. I'm delighted to be here. So nice to be here in person again. I think the last time I was here was October last year when we did the Festival in a Box. So some of you may know me, most of you probably don't. My name is, but I operate a company called the Whisky Lounge. I'm also a brand consultant for various others, and I just love whiskey. Talking about whiskey, I write a little bit about whiskey when I can be bothered, yeah. So that's why I'm here today. And obviously, I'm quite local to the distillery, so it's only an hour away from where we are in York. So it's no problem to come over here, and always a pleasure. But anyway, I'm here joined by my erstwhile friends over here. So we've got Joe Clark, Director of Whiskey here at Spirit of Yorkshire, and David Thompson, one of the founders of the distillery, for his sins.
Yeah. Somebody had to do it. Yeah.
How are you guys? All right?
We're really good. Looking forward to the next sort of few hours, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I only arrived about an hour and a half ago, but I know this. And bear with us if there are any technical hitches. You'll know by now that these online things, there's always something. There's always a mic drop moment, but hey, we'll try.
As long as it's not me.
Yeah. We'll hopefully get through that. So, Joe, tell us what do you do here? Do you know?
Nose and taste a lot of whiskey, and try my very best to make sure what we put in a bottle tastes as good as it possibly can. And that is absolutely number one priority on every day and every week and every month. It's it is a job which is pretty cool. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of tasting, but it's serious stuff as well. We're making sure that Yorkshire whiskey tastes good. So
yeah, it's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, really, isn't it?
Very broad shoulders, Eddie. You'll know that.
At times.
And thankfully, it's not a burden that I bear alone. We've got a great team of people here. Obviously, yes. David as well has a good input into what we're doing in terms of whiskey. We've got our head distiller Dom as well, who will be on a session later on. We're always working together, and again, everybody in the team we involve wherever we can in terms of taste and everything like that. But it's all about making sure that tastes its absolute best. That's my focus.
Would it be fair to say you're the distillery master blender?
Yeah, I suppose you could do that. I don't know. I don't really go with that term. Whiskey director's great.
Yeah.
I think it's less. Less. What's the word I'm looking for here?
Pretentious.
That'll do.
I'll tell Ian that.
Yeah, no.
But it has different meanings in different parts of the world, and
it does.
No, I know exactly what you mean. It's the same. If someone says to me, "You're a whiskey expert," I say, "No," and I would never consider myself a whiskey expert. I'm someone who loves whiskey, and I love directing people towards whiskey and helping them on their journey. And obviously, I've picked up a lot of stuff along the way, but I would never consider myself expert because I don't make the stuff. I don't have that expertise in the actual production of it. And regardless, even if I did, there's always stuff to learn.
That is true. You never ever stop learning in this industry.
Exactly. But anyway, David, how you doing?
Well, first of all, really good question to him, because I've been wanting to ask him that question for a long time. What does he actually do?
Yeah.
That's the longest answer I've had for a long time. So brilliant.
Pleasure.
No, yeah.
So what do you do?
All right. Well,
great.
Pretty good point. No, I mean, what do I do? I mean, I've been thrown into whiskey, but it sounds odd being thrown into something. But actually, it was not a career choice. It was the way my sort of life went. And good friend with Tom Mellor, who's a farmer and the brewer, And it was just one of those conversations one day, obviously with a pint in your hand.
Obviously.
Would you like to make whiskey? And for me, I've always loved whiskey. So, that was a big tick in the box. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a whirlwind journey. But so what do? I suppose, pin everything together and try and keep all the balls in the air. Mm-hmm. And now I've got a great team around me. I suppose one of the big things is building the team that you can trust to take the business forward. And with Joe on board and a few other really key members of the team, I think we're getting there now. Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly one thing I notice whenever I come here is everyone gets on. It's like a happy family. So if you've not been to the distillery and you're not too far away, it's well worth coming to, because you just it's like a distillery should be. Some of the great distilleries that we've been to, and you just know when it's a happy distillery with happy people genuinely getting on, banter. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, we have good fun.
Yeah.
And that's for me just as important as making good whiskey, is having fun doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we'll have a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Sure. Hopefully some today.
Exactly.
Well, yeah,
and we will be meeting some of the other team later on, so that's really important that everyone sees them and recognises their importance to the efforts as well. So do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about what's coming up?
Yeah, sure.
Today,
so it's a really packed day of events. If you've familiarised yourself with the schedule, whether that be in a newsletter or on the website or just over our kind of events section on our Facebook page, you'll see what we've got coming up throughout the day. It's actually a total of 9 sessions where we're looking at various different parts of production. We're going to be, of course, crucially working through the tasting pack, which a lot of you have bought, especially for today. We're going to be tasting plenty of whiskey, and a lot of that will be the brand new Yorkshire Day bottling. But yeah, I guess if we look at some of the sessions specifically, we're kicking off with a live tour and tasting session. So, we jumped in the deep end here. We're doing a lot of this live today. We did have conversations about pre-recording, but we thought, no, we want the energy and we want it live. Of course, that comes with its risks, but, we'll cross any of those as we reach them. Just as a quick caveat here, we are very much people that talk about whiskey, make whiskey, and indeed sell whiskey, and we do it very well. But one thing we are all very new to is kind of TV production. So thankfully, we've got I'd like to say an expert with us today, helping us glue all that together behind the camera.
Yeah. And if anything goes wrong, it's his fault.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. We shall remain nameless until the end of the day, maybe. But yeah, we've got a live tour and tasting session. That's the first thing that we're doing. We're doing that at 12 o'clock. If you've got a tasting pack in your hand already and you're like, when are we opening this? We'll be opening that pretty soon. We're going to go from that into a wood and maturation slot. So we're going to be looking at casks and the importance of casks, where we get them, how we source them, David's adventures to Kentucky and Spain. We'll look at some kind of basic kind of coopering skills and the kind of what casks mean to us and all about the oak and what they're all about. Following on from that, we have Tom Mellor and David Thompson.
Yeah.
If you want to talk all about this.
Yeah, well, talk about the farm. And sustainability, really. I mean, at the end of the day, we're pretty unique in the fact that we grow all our own barley that goes into the whiskey. And because of that, we've got full control over that. So we can control how we grow the crop, the variety we grow, and, how sustainable we grow it. So that session is really detailed on the growing part of making the barley that turns into malt, turns into whiskey. So, yeah, that should be good. That's at 1:30. And that's followed by one section I'm really excited about is the Jim Swan effect. So if you've been following us in the past, and indeed a lot of the distilleries that have been set up and helped by Jim Swan, he was an incredible guy. And hopefully on that session, we can share my experience of him. Also, we've got a couple of guys who have, I'm not sure that Don had direct connection, but he's written a great article about Jim. Which is really exciting. And
that's Don Roscoe, right?
Yeah. And then we've got Ian Chang, who was the Cavalan superstar, really, I guess you could call him that. He's moved on now, but his experience of Jim is absolutely brilliant. So we're going to cover all our sort of life with Jim and how he's influenced the whiskey, really.
Yeah, well, that's great. And then we'll have another tour and a tasting with Amy, who will, I'm sure, do a fantastic job. Then followed by a cocktail session.
Oh,
Christ. where apparently we'll be making some of our favourite cocktails using, obviously, Yorkshire Day whiskey. And then, Joe, what have we got at 4:30?
So after the tour and after the cocktail class, we are into a nice session where we've got Jenny Ashwood, who's our marketing manager. We've got Libby and we've got Amy and a special guest, Moa, the Swedish whiskey girl, for a session that we dubbed Women Who Whiskey. So they're going to be getting together and just chatting about really parts of the industry and, you know, working in an industry which is fair to say has been predominantly male-led, certainly throughout the kind of last 20, 30 years. I think it's changing dramatically now. So it's a really interesting kind of session talking about a topic which is really hot right now, which is, you know, getting more people, making the industry more inclusive and bringing wherever possible, you know, kind of bright, enthusiastic women into the industry. It should be a really great class. Moa's got a fantastic following online. She does some really, really cool kind of tastings and some really interesting things. So it should be a really nice session. And yeah, after that, we are looking at a really nice overview of new make production. So I think for a lot of you guys, if you kind of a bit more nerdy, you want to kind of get under the skin of our distillation, it'll be me and it'll be Dom, our head distiller, and we'll be kind of going through some of the kind of really nice headline info on what we've done over the last few years in terms of production and, you know, how many distillations and how many casks we fill, that kind of thing. But also looking specifically at our middle cut, of which we've got two, for two different styles of spirit that we make. So that's a really nice detailed session looking in on spirit production. So that is well worth tuning into. So between the wood session and the spirit production, you're going to get a lot more kind of technical info on what we're doing.
So something for everyone.
Yeah,
including the geeks.
Well, you know, it's all important. You know, we've got a lot of fans that are they want the detail.
Oh, I'm one of them.
Well,
I might pretend not to be, but
trying to
I'm
stay
very
cool.
much looking forward to it. And Dave, what have we got? So towards the back end of the day, we're at 5:30.
Yeah, really. Again, this has been a pre-recorded session actually, because Tim from Munton Malt couldn't actually join us on the day, so we did a pre-recorded session with Tim. You know, we're making malt whiskey, and the only way to do that is using malted barley. So the whole process of how that barley after harvest ends up as something we can use to ferment and make our whiskey. So really detailed, in-depth conversation with Tim and Tom about how we grow the barley and effectively what goes into malting process. So, you know, it's quite a fascinating thing. You've never heard that before.
No, absolutely. I think you know, people understand that malted barley is the main element apart from the water and the yeast, but perhaps don't realize, you know, what the history is behind it and the you know, the care and attention that you guys go to in order to use your own barley and then you know, get it malted and bring it back.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've got that pretty unique relationship where all our barley is ring fenced, so they look after it, bring it back to us, and we know it's our barley. So it's a really good subject.
Is each bit marked?
Absolutely, yeah. It's got a little code on it. Yeah,
little
scan everyone in.
Tiny little barcode on it.
So it's a really in-depth session. So
great.
Really looking forward to that.
Wonderful.
And then the sort of final bit is a bit of music. I mean, at the distillery, I've always been, and the team really love live music. And before the problems we've all had just recently, we used to have a lot of live sessions, which we will get back to at the distillery. So Edwina is one of our regulars. We all know and love her, and she's going to be live as sort of closing out the session, really. So really looking forward to
closing things off. Obviously with a dram in hand.
She's always got a dram in hand. Always.
Yeah. Well, talking of which,
I think that's a great cue to get a whiskey.
So we've got. Do you want to? So we've got some flagship here.
That's right.
Maybe tell us.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. If you pour,
I'll pour. You
pour,
talk.
and I'll talk.
Used to do both things.
Great. So Finally Bay Flagship. So if you've picked up a tasting pack specifically for today, the virtual open day tasting pack, in there you will have a 5cl bottle of Flagship, 5cl bottle of peated finish, and a 5cl bottle of the Yorkshire Day 2021 bottling. And so if you've got that pack and you want to stick with us for the next hour, what we'll be doing is tasting Flagship first, then we're going to taste the peated finish up there by the stills, and then we're going to finish off tasting Yorkshire Day 2021 by some casks. If you've got the pack, or indeed if you've got a bottle of Flagship, or any of our releases actually, great time to pour a whiskey.
Or even if you don't, just grab something.
Well, it's true.
In your hand.
Yeah, true. It doesn't have to be Finally Bay. That is a fair
That would be an advantage.
But it does have to be whiskey.
But
preferably whiskey.
Yeah, can't be gin. Can't be
Don't go.
Well, if you haven't,
mention the G,
we're gonna describe it anyway to you. So if you haven't got it, we can tell you what it's like.
Very good. So I mean, you'll have noticed just as we started the session, I've been drinking water. Water is your friend throughout the day, like today, especially if you're planning to stick with us for the full every session. Staying hydrated is good, but it's also good in terms of tasting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Before jumping into any tasting, I always make sure that I'm well hydrated. The first step in any whiskey tasting or any whiskey event or any kind of practical nosing session in the lab or at the warehouse for me is just getting used to the strength of the spirit in the glass and just adapting. And you'll see Eddie there is doing exactly that by nosing away. I'm yammering on about.
It's my favourite bit.
Stuff. Yeah.
Apart from the drinking.
At least you're doing it the right way around.
Well, wait till later.
You'll notice we've got nosing glasses. But you don't need a nosing glass with no whiskey. It does help when it comes to nosing.
So tell us, this was released, was it the back end of last year? Or?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we launched this in October 2020, and it was a continuation. So anyone who's followed us from our launch of our whiskey launch, end of 2019, we did a first release and a second release, bourbon matured, showcasing and highlighting our house style. And this was the evolution of those two releases. So it's Finally Bay matured in bourbon, which is at the very kind of core of our warehouse. And the bourbon barrel for us and this style, this light fruity style, underpins all of the whiskies that we make, really. With the odd exception where we go to full term sherry and things like that. But it's very much the heart of what we do. It's kind of lovely light and fruity style, and bourbon cask is brilliant for that. So we did launch at the end of 2020, but it came along at the same time as our Sherry Cask Reserve #1, which was there was a lot of excitement about that. So that did definitely get the kind of the airplay, if not the spotlight, exactly. But Flagship is a whiskey that we will be releasing continuously. So we've got a process for this. Which involves just one way of looking at it, and that is a really nice kind of consistency. It's throughout all every batch of it that we do, and that will a kind of average age in there, which is creeping up, which is really nice as more of the warehouse comes of age, gives more casks available to play with, and we can reach a little bit deeper into that warehouse and just kind of keep this whiskey developing and evolving all the time, but crucially sticking to that flavor profile, which is the light fruity kind of citrus, honey, vanilla, and that's what this is all about, really, just easy going.
So does the kind of Solera system that you're using, does that make it more difficult to pin down a kind of proportion of first fill versus refill?
It's complicated. It's complicated, and I think I realise now why a lot of young distilleries wouldn't embark on it. Because it's a lot of extra work. But it does mean for us, we've always from day one we've wanted consistency, and we've wanted, if you're we've got some brilliant partners in Europe now, and pretty soon even further afield. And we want to make sure if you're grabbing a bottle of whiskey in Berlin, or if you're buying a bottle of Flagship in New York, or you're picking it up in in London, that you've got that continuity.
Mm-hmm.
People can rely on this whiskey delivering what they want,
Yeah.
and that was part of it. And you can achieve that without a system like this. Don't get me wrong, but it just allows it increases that consistency factor,
Mm-hmm.
if you like. But it does make it harder work because it's just a lot more to-ing and throwing and batting and blending and percentages. Yes, between not just the bourbon cask, but
you say, so I need to understand simple things. But
Okay.
but for me, that sums it up. It's trying to get that consistency. So
yeah.
Okay, so what percentage? We're 46%. Should we talk about the flavours, the aromas? That we're finding?
Yeah, lovely.
'Cause I've sat here nosing it for quite a while now.
yeah,
sure.
far too long.
But for me, it's very tropical fruity. So kind of peaches, nectarines, pineapple chunks. You get a bit of banana custard as well. It's,
Right.
just to sort of smother the fruit in a nice creaminess as well, which is it's just really nice and fruity, and it's not over oaked, if you know what I mean. It's not dominated by the oak in any way,
No.
which is quite refreshing, I think, because there's quite a lot of whiskey out there which is very much oak forward, whereas I think this is distillate forward. If that makes sense. Well, of course it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from there's a session, as we said, about the wood and where we've got them from, but the consistency of the bourbon cask is paramount. There's no point in doing all of what you've just described if you haven't got consistency in your wood.
Right.
So sourcing that is so important. But you can see that coming out now in the nose. It's not too oaky. It's quite mellow, soft, and I think that's what we're trying to achieve with our flagship.
Yeah. What I was doing there is adding a little bit of water to it, which some people like to do. What it does tend to do is amplify a lot of the flavor characteristics. So we'll do it a lot when we're judging and analyzing. I'm sure Joe does it in the lab a great deal, because it really just, the more water you add, the more you drill into the DNA of the whiskey and really get the real subtle ester notes that you might not pick up when it's at full strength. I like doing it.
This tastes water very well.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like a sort of citrus bloom now as well. It's just really.
Yeah, it does. It can open it up in a big way. I mean, hopefully, if you, definitely advise, as we work through the tasting, and if you've got that tasting pack, you don't have to drink all that at once. And actually, if you've got enough whiskey there to have a little experiment. So, if you've never thought about adding water to whiskey, hold a little bit of that whiskey back and try it later with water, or maybe get a second glass and put a bit in there and put a bit of water in and compare the differences. And you'll see, as Eddie suggests, you see a very elevated nose.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the time of day and mood, because it tastes good without water. And I think maybe later at night when you might have had something to eat and you're a little bit less sensitive, should we say, on the palate, drinking it neat might make more sense. Whereas at this time of day, a little bit of water legitimizes it slightly.
I suppose it's
whiskey in the morning.
We've just got into whiskey at 11:45 on a Saturday. Happy days. Cheers.
It definitely changes it though.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. It becomes much more citrusy, much more vibrant, even though it was very fruity to begin with. That's really good.
So while we're talking about water, what's your view of ice?
Well, the type of water we should use.
Water or ice, or what's the best water for whiskey?
The best water generally is just something very pure and without strong minerals or anything that's going to affect the flavor of the whiskey. So tap water tends to be, chemicals to keep us safe, obviously, but they don't do the whiskey any favors. And particularly if you're in a really big city, the tap water can be pretty rank.
And it can change, can't it? I mean, depending where they get the water from. So.
Exactly. So generally speaking, a good spring water, we're using Strathmore here. Harrogate do a good one as well. There's Highland Spring. There's plenty of them, and it's generally worth keeping a bottle in your, not actually in the fridge. You don't want cold water necessarily because you don't want to reduce the temperature of the whiskey. People have done many experiments with whiskey. I remember in my Glenmorangie days, we did an experiment with hot whiskey, sort of blood temperature to room temperature to cool to having been in a freezer, and the difference in the flavors, you taste them blind, you would swear they were different whiskies. So it is quite important, the rough temperature at which you serve the whiskey, depending on how you like it. Not too cold, not too hot, room temperature generally.
The Goldilocks equation. Not too hot, not too cold.
So. Not too sweet. And then with ice, it's up to everyone ultimately. I drink bourbon rye with ice because they're designed to be drank with ice. I think they're very strong, intense, robust beasts of whiskies, really. Whereas something like this, which is it's a single malt whiskey that has been brought together in a way that you want the flavors to be nice and complex, delicate. If you put a lump of ice in there and it's going to break all of that apart, it's also going to have the secondary effect. Then you've got a secondary effect of it actually cooling your palate, your tongue down, which means you're not able to taste as effectively either. So generally speaking, ice in more intense whiskies, so you can get away with it in an Ardbeg or a Lagavulin or something, if you feel like it, but not necessarily with more sort of subtle, complex spirits.
Well, okay.
So I think I've drunk some of mine.
Yes. Good.
Yeah, I definitely can.
So you should. Yeah. If you haven't started tasting it, please do. We've been talking about water there, and I don't doubt that'll raise some questions about how we use water in production and where it comes from. And we're going to address that in a really lovely short film, which we're going to watch just before we go into moving around the distillery and carrying on with our virtual tour / tasting. So what we'll do is we're going to let you guys absorb this film. It's really nice. It introduces not only our founders. Obviously, we've got David here. You're going to see Tom Moe on this video as well. But you'll get a good feel for where we come from, what we're about, why we do what we do, and you're going to see some lovely shots of the farm as well and that kind of thing. So it's a nice way to set the scene.
It is, yeah. Can I just add something?
Yes.
If you've got any questions, throw them in.
Yeah. Oh yeah, do definitely.
Please throw questions at us. We've got Libby behind the scenes who's going to sort of feed that to us. So any questions, seamlessly, as long as it's a polite question, we will take questions and hopefully answer them for you throughout the day and every session.
Great stuff. So we're going to play the film right now, and we'll be back with you in a minute.
See you soon.
My grandfather bought the farm at the end of the Second World War and farmed it until the late 50s. My dad took over from him, farmed it till the mid-80s, and I really have taken it over from that point. It's a traditional Yorkshire arable farm, high on the Yorkshire wolds, and in the late 1990s, early 2000s, we were not making very much money from doing our traditional growing of oilseed rape, wheat and barley. So we had, like everybody else in the country, to start to look to move the business in a different direction. I looked at the resources that we had on the farm at that particular point, and the two main ones that struck me were the fact that we had our own water supply, and the other thing is that we grow a lot of malting barley. So I put the two and two together and came up with the idea of brewing, and did some research into that, and decided that that would be a way forward for us on our particular farm. So in 2003, we set up the Woldtop Brewery, and that's continued to grow over the last 15, 16 years. In 2011 and 12, it seemed like a logical progression that we could make a whisky, because the first part of the brewing process and the first part of the whisky making process are identical. Having explored that, it then needed putting into practice, and if I'd not gone and done that, then I'd have gone to my grave regretting it.
Tom and I have been friends for many years. We've played rugby together, we've seen our families grow up together. So Tom approached me with an idea of making Yorkshire's first single malt whisky. I thought it was a fantastic idea and couldn't wait to get involved with him. So we looked into the production of whisky around the country, and it was evidence that it had never been made in Yorkshire before, which is very unusual, as we have some of the best malting barley growing land in the area. And it just made absolute sense to use the resources local to us to produce something completely unique. The next step for us really was to develop a brand behind the story, and as we are based only 10 minutes down the road from the biggest gannet colony in the UK, we felt we wanted to use the gannet as our mascot, as it represents a lot that we're doing at the business. It's very tenacious, it's very graceful, and it's full of spirit. So we felt that represented us very well.
The Yorkshire Wolds is a great area for growing malting barley. It's got thin calcareous soils, which barley likes. Barley does not like big, heavy land. We also have a fantastic water supply as well, which comes from the chalk aquifers under the farm. The farm doesn't actually have mains water. And the one thing about this water is that it's very, very consistent, which is one of the reasons why we think our beer has been so consistent over the last 18 years.
So the first part of making a whisky is actually making something that resembles beer, which is called wash. We do that by using the barley from the farm and sending it down to Munton's malting factory at Bridlington. That comes back to us as a malted barley, and we then steep that barley in hot water and make a very sticky, sugary solution. From that, we add the yeast and we start to produce alcohol. Once we've got this sugary solution and it's turned into alcohol, we end up with an 8% alcohol wash. This is the product we put into the copper stills, and this is the stuff that we start to make the whisky from.
Well, we're incredibly proud that we are a fully fledged field-to-bottle distillery. We've got absolutely everything that we need here on the Yorkshire Wolds for making an excellent whisky. One of the things that's really important to us is knowing exactly that it's our barley that goes into our bottle. What that also does is it gives us a degree of consistency that a lot of small brewers and distillers wouldn't have, because our malt is effectively one big batch.
There's only a handful of distilleries around the world that could claim to be fully field-to-bottle producers. That gives us great traceability. You can rewind that liquid back into a field, which I find very fascinating and a great story.
The sustainability of the farm is really important to us, and that's what underpins everything that we do. It was the reason why we started brewing in the first place, was to make sure that the farm could continue and could be a legacy for the future. One of the things we're trialling this year is direct drilling, which means basically you don't disturb the soil when you plant the next crop. The current thinking, and it's been shown by various different research bodies, that by ploughing the land, we are releasing a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, which doesn't really need to be released. Our responsibilities as a land user are to make sure that we don't take too much out of the soil or the land and leave not enough for the future. So it's trying to really safeguard future years with the best current thinking.
You don't get many chances to produce something that's completely unique, and whisky in Yorkshire is one of them. You only get the chance to release first Yorkshire whisky once, and we felt, Tom and I together, wanted that opportunity to do something completely different. So we chose the name Filey Bay for our first single malt whisky, as we can see Filey Bay from our distillery. It made absolute sense to use the area, as we love the coast, we love the sea, it's ever changing, and Filey Bay represents everything we are at this distillery. The next step for us really was to develop a brand, and what we didn't want to do was just copy somebody else's idea of what whisky should be. So we developed a brand which stood out, which was different, which was fresh. Again, using all the assets of the area and everything that we felt was good about the area. And we hope we've put that into the bottle, we've put that into the label, and everybody involved in the business has put everything into what we've produced. So we feel that we've produced a brand that is completely different and unique. First and foremost, we set up the Spirit of Yorkshire to make the best possible whisky we could. But then, of course, we needed to share that. So to do that, we set up the visitor centre and the coffee shop. That is very important to us, that it's not just about the production, but it's also about the people. So thank you for coming to the Spirit of Yorkshire and sharing our journey. I hope you enjoy the rest of your tour and take away a part of Yorkshire which is completely unique.
Some other reason that you needed it.
Okay. Well, welcome back everyone, and we hope you enjoyed the video. Just to get you up to the point where we're at the distillery. So the mash and the wash has been dealt with at the brewery, and we're going to go and have a look where we turn it into the good stuff.
Great stuff.
Not that it wasn't good stuff before, obviously.
So we're going to take a walk through the distillery. So what we've got behind us here is the spirit still. And we'll get a kind of better view of this as we come up the steps. And as we come round. So, yeah, if you've never been to see us before, obviously Eddie's been here plenty of times and seen this kit and is kind of used to being around stills and whatnot. But, yeah, if you've never seen us, if you've never seen inside a whiskey distillery before, what we've got here are copper pot stills. And you know, this is very much the beating heart of the whiskey distillery and any whiskey distillery. So our pot stills, two of the nicest, shiniest, largest pot stills making whiskey in England. So they are made in a facility in Rothes in Scotland. It's a company called Forsyths. You've heard of Forsyths before, haven't you, Eddie?
Once or twice.
Yeah. Very well known if you're into whiskey, if you're into distilleries. Forsyths have furnished some of the best known distilleries around the world, really. Everything from Macallan to Kavalan in Taiwan and many, many, many in between. They've got stills pretty much on every continent and in every whiskey making country. I think Forsyths will have at some point had interaction with a distillery there. So arguably like the Bentley or the Rolls Royce of whiskey making equipment. Mm-hmm. Not something you can just kind of hop on Amazon and go, I'll have a pair of them. Mm-hmm. You're looking, when we were getting these commissioned, when Tom and Dave were talking to Forsyths, and this was back, pre-2016, you could have been anything in a 3 to 4 year waiting list to get equipment like this. Not sure what the waiting list is now, but certainly I would be surprised if it's anything less. It's not like those distillery builds are slowing down at the minute.
No, that's right. No, I mean, they're continuing to supply all around the world, as you say, and they're so in demand.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a massive seal of approval when you see a pair of Forsyths stills.
It really is. It's just such beautiful equipment. It's an absolute pleasure to work with, and it helps us, really helps us make the kind of spirit style that we're looking to make and create the fruity whiskey that we want to make. So I'll just give you a quick bit of insight into which one's which. So this is our wash still. It's a 5,000 litre wash still. So the production that you'll have seen on that video where we're talking about the steps of whiskey making that we do at our sister company, which is Waltop Brewery, So we're doing the milling, mashing and fermentation up there. Production for us starts with a delivery of 10,000 litres of wash, which we're bringing down to the still house. And then as soon as we've got that delivery into a large vessel that's hiding over there, we're going to put 5,000 litres straight into here. That fills this still to just under the opening there. And I think we can actually have a peer in, Jonathan, if you want to have a little look. We'll show you what happens in the still. So you can kind of see what's happening in there. So that is very dark, but you can see at the bottom there just a steam coil. So that's like a big element in a kettle. There we go. So, you know, that's what's happening inside the still. That coil is going to drive loads of heat into the 5,000 litres of wash, or basically a beer that we've got in there. So
it's a giant copper kettle.
A giant kettle, Eddie. You've got it. Yeah, exactly right. So yeah, it's a really quite energetic process. When you take that kind of volume of liquid up to incredibly high temperatures, it gets pretty lively. So if we just come around this side, actually, if I pop you over there, Eddie, and Jonathan, if you just have a little look at these valves here, and here we've got a thermometer. The gauge underneath that is pressure. And, you know, between these instruments, we're going to use these to control this first round of distillation. Some of you, the eagle-eyed amongst you, will probably worked out already that we're manual. Okay, so there isn't a kind of automated distilling piece of software that takes care of this for us. We're doing all of this by hand. So first things first, on a day of distilling, we're filling that still with wash. We're bringing it up to temperature. We're going to use this to control the temperature and how hot it's getting and how quickly. We're watching the temperature and watching the pressure there. Okay, so if you just cast your eye up a little bit, and I'll show you where that is going to go. So that spirit vapor, which is rising off that wash, is going to travel up the still. It's going to rise up, travel along the line arm that's above my head, and it's going to reach this condenser. Okay, so the hot spirit vapor is now going to return to liquid in the condenser, and from there it's going to run into the spirit safe. And this is our first round of distillation, if you like. So principles of distillation, gloriously simple. Okay, alcohol has a lower boiling point than water. So what we're doing is we're using heat to separate that alcohol. And as we're separating the alcohol, we're taking with it loads of fruity flavor compounds that we've created in fermentation. And as it rises and weaves through that process, it's going to interact with copper. And in that, it's going to remove impurities, and it's going to help shape the spirit style that we're making. So that's kind of round one of distillation. We're going to turn 5,000 litres of wash, which starts at 8% alcohol. And on this first distillation over a day of about 7 hours, we're going to turn that into 1,700 litres of what we call low wines at 25%, which is nowhere near strong enough, nowhere near pure enough, and nothing like what we want to be putting into casks, as you might expect.
And doesn't taste that great.
No, it's not the kind of stuff that you want to be putting in a glass, believe me, but it is quite interesting because you're concentrating all the alcohol out of that wash into it, but there are some quite really pleasant fruity notes, certainly on a morning, because as the low wine starts flowing, it's real kind of banana bread and really fruity. Yeah, the aroma. But yeah, of course, that distillation runs all day, and throughout the day, different compounds come at different times, so you get a really mixed bag of flavour in the low wines. Low wines, as I say, is nowhere near refined enough for us to be putting into casks, so we're going to distill it again. Okay, and that's what that still's for. Yeah, so we have the spirit still, which is a smaller still because we deal with smaller volumes of liquid. So our wash still is 5,000 litre, our spirit still 3,500 litres. Okay, the same principles apply. We're going to drive heat into the base of the still through a steam coil, and we're going to use that heat to separate alcohol from the liquid, but also lots of lovely flavour compounds as well. So that spirit vapour, just like in the low wine still, wash still is going to rise up the neck of the still. It's going to travel along the line arm that's above Eddie's head, and it's going to hit the condenser. It's going to return to liquid and then run into the spirit safe. Okay. So the spirit run, really, really important. You know, this is part of the distillation process that really can shape your distillery character. You know, there's lots of different reasons that our whiskey tastes the way it does, and this is a big part of it. So if I just lift this up, if you've never seen a spirit safe before, it's like a very kind of, well, I suppose it's like a Victorian computer.
Yeah.
And you know, they haven't really changed over the years, but it's a brilliant, very, very, very reliable piece of equipment. So in here we've got thermometers, so we can measure temperature. Okay, we've got hydrometers, which allows us to measure alcohol strength. And we're going to use the temperature and the strength and time, and indeed our senses, to navigate where we're going to find a sweet spot in the middle of the run. So you'll know all about those 3 stages, Eddie. I'm going to put you on the spot, if you wouldn't mind saying what the first phase of the spirit run is.
Well, the heads.
Correct.
4 shots.
Indeed. So 4 shots is the more technical term. Heads, the slightly more romantic.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
I consider myself a romantic. But
well,
Amanda will disagree.
you're romantically dressed today. There's no doubt about that.
Dressed for the ladies.
So we've got the 4 shots, or the heads. We then move into the middle cut, or the heart of the run, and then we're on to the feints, also known as the tails. And it's really all about that middle cut, the heart of the run.
Yeah.
So where you find that heart, where you find that sweet spot in the middle, really, really, really important.
And it varies quite a bit between distillery and distillery.
It is very, very broad, and this is another reason that, you know, whiskey is such a complex and diverse drink. You know, we all, in terms of single malt whiskey, it's barley, yeast, and water, isn't it? That's our only ingredients. But these little twists and turns in production techniques make a big difference.
Yeah,
and, this part for us, you know, we're always at the safe during the middle cut. We're watching it really, really closely. And as I mentioned before, we're manual, so we'll have this open. We don't keep this locked. You know, a lot of distilleries, you'll see the spirit safe locked. We're in and out of it quite a lot. There's a bit of a throwback to kind of the ye olde whiskey making days. You might try and keep your distillery crew from nicking your spirit. But anyone who's ever worked in a distillery would ever tell you, whether it be in old days or new, spirit safe would never be the place to do it. You know, it's quite interesting. You see some of the historical ways that they pilfer spirit. But, that's why they used to be locked, but we keep ours open. So for the first part of the run, watching it really closely, we're looking for lovely flavours starting to emerge for the middle cut. We're going to talk more about this later in the distillation session, so don't worry if you're kind of thinking, is there a bit more detail on this?
And also, if you have any questions throughout the tours and tastings, please feel free to fire them through on the Facebook or YouTube channel.
And they can be about anything, any part of the process that we've been looking at so far. They can also be about Eddie's shirt. They can be about anything at all, anything that you want.
What's wrong with my shirt? Oh, we have a question coming through. Okay, a question regarding to style. Is there any ambition to try making single pot still? So using unmalted barley, is that something you've considered?
That's a really, really good question. So whoever's asked that, you know, well played. That's a really interesting.
Peter Cooney, apparently.
Peter Cooney, okay. So yes, Peter, great question. Thank you for that. As you know, we make whiskey in England. It would be a little bit, I don't know how it would be received by an Irish whiskey maker if we were to adopt the Irish whiskey making practice. It's not something we've considered. The style we're referring to here that Eddie mentioned, single pot still, is using unmalted barley in the mashing in the early stages of production. So using malted and unmalted barley, which is a style, very traditional to Ireland, an unsung style.
I think, well, it's definitely picking up a bit, isn't it? I think, but I think one company, Jameson, really has just flown the flag for it for so many years. But the other bit about it is they tend to triple distill, which would be not impossible, obviously, but it would be slightly more of a pain in the ass for you.
It would require a little bit more pipework vessels, ideally another still. But you know, we'll never say never to things like that, but we've not done it yet, and we certainly aren't planning to do it in the very near future, Peter. But if we are ever going to do it, we'll be sure to pay you a visit and see how you guys are doing it. So our middle cut, we are keeping it really short and we're keeping it really tight. And this is because we are making light fruity whiskey. So our foreshots and feints are actually the largest, well, the feints certainly the largest part of the run for us. So middle cut for us will run for about an hour and 20 minutes. Foreshots ahead of that are going to be for about 10 to 15 minutes. And this varies day in, day out, temperatures and different variables. But that middle cut, very, very, very fruity. And if we're on spirit style 1, if you like, which is our kind of more traditional style, that'll average about 73% in the middle cut in terms of alcohol strength. So pretty punchy, fair to say.
Pretty punchy.
And yeah, from the middle cut, we're then going to take that. That's what we're going to put into casks. That's what we're going to mature, and that's what's going to be whiskey.
I did have a question for you, but not about the cuts. It was more about the shape and size of the stills. So I don't know if the viewers are able to see both stills at the same time. And I'm going to challenge Jonathan's technical prowess here, but they're quite different in terms of not just their size, but in terms of the shape. So the spirit still, to me, is a slightly more traditional shape with a sort of tapered waist, if you like, before the bowl or the ball, and then the wash still has this bulbous, almost slightly inflated looking waist before it gets to the bowl. So what's the story there? Why is that?
So you see, lots of different shapes and sizes of stills, and what these two very different designs do is they allow for extra copper contact within the distillation. So the more copper contact that you create, and the more that your spirit vapor is in contact with copper, and the more interplay there is between the spirit vapor and the copper, the more impurities you'll take out of that spirit. So the lantern shape just basically increases the surface area inside the spirit still. You'll notice that it's kind of right up to the ceiling. So if we like tall, skinny stills are also great for creating lots of copper contact. You remember that from your Glenmorangie days, of course. So it's another way of kind of achieving that, but with a shorter still profile. The boil ball on the wash still would do a similar job if it was on a spirit still. However, for us, it's got an extra application where we're using it to control that wash as it starts to bubble up on the morning. So it actually slows that down. So if you imagine if the wash still was very, very tall and skinny, as you bring 5,000 litres of wash up to kind of 96 degrees, it wants to fire a big column of foam straight up the neck of the still. And so, the boil ball helps slow that down. It helps you control the distillation more. And it just keeps, when we're stood here on a morning, we're controlling temperature here, and we're watching through the window on the wash still to catch that foam, and that just helps with that process. So you do see them reversed out. It's a really interesting. Again, it's just one of these lovely little quirks and differences that you see between distilleries.
And are we going to talk about this?
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about it in detail later. But as a quick summary, we are using this piece of equipment to create another spirit style that we are maturing. So we are one single malt whiskey distillery, but we can make 2 styles of new make spirit. And as we've just gone through that brief description of one style, which is our more traditional style, which in the middle cut is 73%. When we're using this column here, we are creating a much stronger distillate. And again, it's had, that spirit vapor has had a lot more contact with copper, and it's working a lot harder to get through this piece of equipment, and therefore you're creating a lighter spirit style with that. So
so this is a completely different type of still. Then this is not
it's a really
a column still.
So we call this a 4-plate rectifying column,
sexy,
which is affectionately known. Dom, actually, our distiller, dubbed it the Yorkshire twist, which it's kind of internally is kind of stuck a little bit, but what it means is we can create the two styles, and it gives us options. It's not a standalone still on its own. Okay, so it works in tandem with the spirit still. If you peer in through that window, Eddie, you're tall enough, you'll be able to just kind of look down. And actually, Jonathan, you'll be able to get in there with a camera as well.
Just in the bottom of there.
Lovely. And if you just peer in through there, it's a little bit dark in there, obviously, but there is, if you can maybe just make it out, we have a little plate in there, and that plate is full of little holes. And this is a plate of copper which the spirit vapor is going to pass through on its way to becoming spirit. I'll do a very, very quick summary of it because I recognise that we're due a whiskey.
We are due a whiskey.
But yeah, the spirit vapor is basically re-diverted away from this condenser, and it goes into the base of the column. It's then going to be kind of moving its way through those 4 copper plates, and as it does so, the plates get really hot. The spirit vapor meets the section on the top, it's a mini condenser, and then returns to liquid and runs back down the column. Are you staying with me? Recognise I'm talking quite fast. Eddie's nodding along off camera. He's heard it many times before, but as the spirit vapor is rising, the spirit is falling, they clash on the plates, you get an enormous amount of activity happening on the plates, and what's happening there is the spirit vapor, which is locked into the spirit that's on its way down, lifts off. So basically, the more plates you have, the stronger your spirit would become in a column. Now, we don't want to go into really crazy high strengths like 96%, which is what you'd be using to make white spirits. We don't make white spirits. So when we're using this, our spirit run will be 88 to 86% alcohol. And with that strength, it still retains loads of character and loads of lovely fruity flavour. And it means we've got a kind of an extra light fruity style of spirit.
And do you ever mix the two?
Great question. Glad you asked. That's exactly what we do. We mature the two styles separately. And what that allows us to do in the warehouse is bring those two styles together in different percentages, different ratios to create different mouthfeel, different character. And it's brilliant, as kind of spending a lot of time, obviously, as you'd expect, with those casks and with that whiskey. Having options is brilliant, from a blending point of view or marrying point of view, as we call it. It just gives you more to play with.
A bit more flexibility.
Yeah, exactly. So we're ready for a dram?
I think we are, aren't we? So what are we gonna taste here, Joe?
So we have our peated finish. Are you pouring?
Yeah, I'll pour.
Good man. So that is our Filey Bay peated finish, which is a very, very recent release. We launched this just in June. And yeah, it's a very different creature to the rest of our range. We wanted to feature it on the open day because obviously it's a new bottling.
Yeah.
But not many, unless you've been following us in the last kind of 6 weeks or so, you might not have come across it.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I have had the pleasure of trying it before. So tell us, how does this differ from, say, Flagship, for example, which you explained about the kind of Solera system you're using with bourbon casks. This is obviously peated casks, so it's not using peated malted barley. It's using casks that have held previously peated whiskies.
Correct. Yeah, spot on.
So are you able to say where they're from, or roughly?
Well, we don't kind of shout about it from the rooftops where these casks originate from. But I'm very happy to say that they're from another field to bottle whiskey distillery on the west coast of Scotland in a very traditional whiskey making setting. I think some of you will join the dots up there. Great casks, really great casks. As Eddie mentioned, I suppose a traditional way of making peated whiskey is you making it with peated malt. So the malt that we use is dried with warm air. If you're drying your malt in malting with peat smoke or partially with peat smoke or kilning it with it, you're going to create kind of smoky flavors in the grain, and that smoky flavor is carried through milling and mashing and fermentation, distillation, maturation, and so you have very heavily peated whiskies. For example, Ardbeg, Lafroig, Lagavulin. Whereas what we've done here is we're using casks which have previously held a heavily peated whiskey, and peated whiskey is so, and peat generally, and phenols, which are kind of the origin of that flavour, kind of weave themselves so deeply into the wood and into the whiskey that was in there. It still carries through that cask. So
it's a very pervasive flavour, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, even if you've had a peated whiskey at night time, and then the next morning, even if there's nothing left in the glass, the smell coming from the glass will just stink out of the kitchen or wherever it is.
Yeah. It is if you spill it. I mean, I try very carefully not to spill whiskey, of course, but when you're moving 20,000 litres of whiskey over the course of a few weeks, a drop or two empties out here and there, and when especially when we were bottling this, for example, that kind of smokiness was kind of emanating just through the kind of bottling line and through that process. It gets on your hands, you can smell the smoke. And that kind of thing.
So given that, we've all been to, well, we haven't not necessarily all been, but we've been to distilleries where they make exclusively peated single malt whiskies, which is fine because obviously the equipment is painted with it all year round. So I imagine for yourselves, where you're making nominally throughout the year a non-peated, delicate, complex single malt, to then bring in a peated wash would just make things a bit more challenging, I would imagine, in terms of, yes, okay, you might do it for 4 or 6 weeks, but then you've got how long it would take to clean that smell out, essentially.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit of a minefield in terms of the mash tun and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because you bring in that flavour, and of course we share our mash tun with the brewery. So we've got to think about them. If we dumped a ton of peated malt into there, that's Alex, who makes a lot of really delicious, lovely beer. That's gonna be a real headache for him. And it's not to say that we'd never try it or anything like that, but it definitely would present some challenges on that side. Now, we share the mash tun, if you like, but all the other pipe work from that mash tun, we've got separate fermenters. So from that point on, we could kind of deal with it, but the sharing of the mash tun would be difficult. I mean, might make some really tasty, smoky beer. But it's not, that's one reason that, we've not gone into it. The other thing is, we're field to bottle. All the raw materials in our production are from the farm. If we're making peated whiskey,
where's the peat coming
from?
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we've got that to consider as well. And I think as well, sustainability, the environment, that kind of thing. Some people, I think, raising a little eyebrow towards peating in terms of landscapes and environmental costs.
I think that's a debate that's going to only become more and more.
It's coming, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
It's coming.
So in a nutshell, it kind of gives you an ability to dabble in the peated style of things without necessarily overcommitting production equipment to the ravages of the phenols.
For sure. That's a great way of putting it. It does. It allows us to kind of weave some of those lovely characteristics into a release, which is what this is all about.
Yeah.
You've had your nose in it already.
Yeah. Well, I was discussing this with David earlier on, and we were both describing it as a kind of gateway peated whiskey, because it's not OTT, it's not really peaty, but it's got a lovely kind of prickly heat of the peat, if you know what I mean. It's not dominating it. It's just kind of knitting the sweetness and the some of the more dominating sweeter flavors. It's just calming them down a little bit and balancing them out, which is what I like about peat. I mean, I love heavily peated whiskies, and there's sometimes when only a heavily peated whiskey will do, but generally these days I prefer that sort of balance between the peat and the sweetness, which I think is what this provides as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of putting it. It is very much a gateway to this style, and a lot of people, experience of peated whiskey varies massively, doesn't it? But you will always come across, and you'll know this better than most when you're in, when you're chatting to hundreds of people that are on their way into whiskey, and if their first interaction with it is something like a really heavily, if their first whiskey they ever taste is something really heavily peated, it's a bit of a shock.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, this is a really nice kind of stepping stone into the style, and for us, it's a really lovely balance between that kind of smokiness and, as you say, sweetness. And it's really, really, really happy with it. Had so many good comments, so many lovely emails of people really enjoying it.
Yeah.
So it has spurred me on to crack on with batch 2.
I was about to ask. This is batch 1.
Yes.
Which apparently is all gone. Certainly from the distillery. Anyway.
Yeah, almost all gone. It has not lasted.
There might be some retailers who still have a bottle.
Yeah, there's definitely some bottles out there if you're looking for it.
But the good news is there's a batch 2 coming.
There is a batch 2 coming.
Great.
Yeah, it will be coming. The process of doing it. So, in terms of the finishing steps for us, and you asked a little bit about this before. So, how does this differ to flagship in terms of production sense? What does that actually mean? People hear the term of finishing. Okay, it's moved from one type of cask into another type of cask. And that is the basic principle of it. But that sounds really easy. But we're moving. So to do this piece of work, I'll try and summarize this as quick as I can. You give me
David.
Yeah, I probably should. I'll try and do this without going too
Channel
deep.
your inner David.
My inner David Thompson, concise. Okay, so to make a batch of whiskey involves steps of cask selection. To select casks, you need to taste them, you need to nose them, you need to do that piece of work. So part of my job is doing that, making sure that we can put together a really tasty batch of whiskey. So you spend a lot of time nosing through the casks, select the casks that you want, and then in the case of the peated finish and indeed the Muscatel finish, RSTR finish, what I'm doing is taking that whiskey, myself and Dom will disgorge those casks. We make sure that we're happy with that batch as a really tasty batch of kind of 3.5, 4-year-old.
Yeah. So you'll disgorge that into.
So I disgorge that into a vessel that we've got down there, and then from there, I'm going to reduce the strength. So we talked briefly the spirit strength, our new make, 73%. If we're just on the pots, 86 to 88 if we're on the column, and in cask we fill the cask at 63.5. So in the case of finishing, what I do is I reduce that batch of whiskey down to 50%, and then I take that through to the secondary cask type.
Right.
And so, that's operationally, that's not a short piece of work.
No.
So that is then filled into the secondary cask type, in this case, peated casks. Those peat casks are then put away, and then you just keep watching them and you keep checking them, and then after a period of time, you're starting to see a point where they're really singing, and you're starting to get the flavour integration and the balance that we're looking for. And at that point, you then do the selection process again.
Yeah.
So you've got all these peated casks, and you want to pick the right ones to make that final batch.
Yeah.
And then on the final disgorging, we reduce to bottling strength, which is 46.
Right.
And then from 46 to another marrying vessel, where it sits for a bit, and then from there it finally goes into a bottle, gets labelled, ends up in a carton, ends up in your hand. You guys taste it, drink it, and go, "That's great." Hopefully, and we're really proud of that process, because it is a lot of extra steps of work. That's how we do it. Can't speak for other distilleries out there. There'll be loads of different ways that distilleries do this kind of work, but for us, it's a lot of extra steps, and and it's worth it.
So just quickly, the 63.5% that you reduce the 73% from the stills down to, do you want to quickly explain why you do that? And then also, I'm quite interested to know why you then reduce from the first set of casks down to 50%, did you say, or 55? 50. Before putting it into the Muscatel or peated casks in this case.
Yeah, sure.
Just give us a little.
So a bit of an overview on that, I guess. Again, trying to remain concise.
You're doing well.
Yeah, the 63.5% is about a sweet spot for maturation. We want to make sure our whiskey can go the distance. If we want to make a 30-year-old whiskey or a 25-year-old Yorkshire whiskey, we've got to make sure that whiskey can mature in that cask for a long, long time. As your casks sit in the warehouse, the strength in this part of the world will fall away. So, you know, our whiskey in the cask is losing alcohol all the time, and so the strength drops away. So 63.5% ensures that your casks will go the distance in terms of maturation. If they drop below 40%, they're no longer whiskey. Not a great situation to be in as a whiskey producer. A warehouse full of not whiskey. So that's one reason. The other part of it, an interesting part of it, which ties into the second part, or second answer, is about flavors in the oak and wood sugars. So, you know, there's lots of flavor in this cask. There's lots of flavor in those staves, you know, and as the whiskey is moving into that oak and it's moving out, it's drawing flavors with it, and with that you get sweetness. And those sugars are more soluble in water than they are in alcohol. You know, so you'll know this if you tried to make an old fashioned and you put whiskey in and then sugar doesn't dissolve. Yeah, you put in sugar and water, the sugar will dissolve. And so it's kind of that principle. You're making sure that those wood sugars have got access to that whiskey.
Right.
So there's a sweet spot with that. And that is a big part of why reducing to 50% to fill into the second cask type just helps that finishing process, and it helps bring softer, sweeter flavors with it at the lower filling strength. That's my experience of filling that. So tend to do that. Not always. Sometimes a little bit higher. Depends how long you want to leave them.
Yes, I was going to say that would have the knock-on effect, wouldn't it?
Exactly. It's a double-edged sword. You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't fill at that strength and expect that cask to sit there for 10 years. Well, you maybe, but not for long periods of time. So yeah, the slow reduction as well is part of it. So it's not just about the interplay of the spirit and the wood, but it's also about you know, giving that whiskey time to adjust to the fact that it's been changed. You know, it's had a lot of water added to it. You add water to whiskey, you'll know this, but if you know, we'll do it actually with Yorkshire Dale, it'll be really interesting. But you see the reaction of the water and the spirit, and you know, it creates a lot of heat. You know, and it's an exothermic reaction. So that whiskey is kind of, you know, it's like you just grabbed it out of bed and shook it and gone, right, come on, slap in a bottle. You know, you've got to give it out you get. It's okay, and we're gonna have some breakfast. We're gonna relax a little bit. We're gonna go into there, and you're gonna love it. And then we're gonna come out of there, and you're gonna have to bottle. And so it's just a gentler process of that, and you see this in cognac. You know, it's a slow reduction of that spirit. And again, you know, there'll be whiskey distilleries that do this. There'll be whiskey distilleries that don't. It's a broad, diverse, and different. And you know, we're in a privileged position where we can really take our time with something like this, and we can you know, put these extra steps in to do what we believe helps make that taste good.
Yeah, and so roughly, I don't know if you mentioned this, but roughly how long does it spend in the finishing casks? In this case, the peated cask.
Yeah, so these casks in particular. So you know, we don't kind of go, it's been in that cask for that long. It's really kind of, you know, you're kind of just saying that's what it is, and that's what it always will be. Now, I might do a piece of work re-racking some 3.5-year-old whiskey. I might start doing that work in October, and then I'll do a bit in November. Then I'll do a bit in December. And so, you know, those casks have had a bit longer than these ones. And they've not had quite as long as that one. So it's, you know, you can average it. You can average it out. But the other thing as well is if you put that declaration, you know, it's been in this other cask type for this amount of time. When it comes to batch 2, you know, I might have some that's been in there longer, less. So you know, it's one of these things that you kind of learn with it is. It's not backing yourself into a corner with something like that, because you kind of suddenly go, well, if it's 6 months, it's 6 months. It'll always be 6 months. People drinking it think it's always 6 months. So actually, next year's batch, in this case, so some of these were filled in November, December, January. So it was, and we bottled it in June. So yeah, you can say average 6 months. Next year's batch might be different.
I was thinking that maybe the better question might. What the better question might be is, you know, what's the sort of minimum period on a peated cask that in which you will see enough impact on the spirit for it to be worthwhile?
Yeah, you see it quite quick. So if you wanted to do it in a real hurry,
yeah,
you know,
so you
flash
could,
in the pan,
yeah,
quick little
peaty pan.
Yeah, you know, but time is, there's no substitute for it. And that extra time in there, you're helping it integrate, helping integration. So you could put that whiskey in for a short period of time and empty it out and go, okay, I've picked up some smoky notes. But is it, you know, in the glass, is that just, oh, it's a bit smoky and then it's that flavour and then it's that flavour? And actually what you want in this is you want it to be as a whole. You want it to integrate nicely. And I think that's one of the challenges with peated finishes. And I think certainly others that I've tasted over the years, you know, I've kind of sometimes thought it's good, it's tasty, it does what it says on the tin, but does it really integrate all the way through? And that is time. That's why that's important.
Yeah. So what about the whiskey itself? What are we finding notes-wise in here? I mean, I've added a little bit of water to mine. I don't know if you have
I
already.
noticed. Yeah, it's good.
Water with peated whiskies, I find, tends to emphasize the phenolic notes, the smokier notes. So if you like smoky whiskies, then adding a bit of water really emphasizes those notes. Do you get that as well, Joe?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's peat, but not at the behest of everything else. You know, it's not like everything else is gone. It's just wrapped around by the peat rather than being completely dominated. And
it's got a lovely, so you do get the sweetness and you do get a fruitiness with there as well. So you do see the kind of the distillery character in there. You know, it's in that whiskey, and that's really important for any whiskey that we're doing, that you can kind of, you know, as you get to know us, and if you're drinking a lot of our whiskey all the time, you know, if you're drinking Flagship on a kind of weekly basis, you know, that you could pick up a bottle of this and go, oh, you know what, I can feel the distillery character in there.
For sure.
We're gonna have to move on because we've got more whiskey to try.
Oh, what a shame.
Deary me.
Lead on.
I will lead on. Onwards. Yes, we're moving down to the other side of the still house. Wash still is now behind us, and we're going to move to an area that we've set up to be able to talk about casks and taste the final whiskey, which is what this weekend is all about. It's what these sessions are all about, and it's what many people are very excited about. It is, of course, our Yorkshire Day 2021 bottling. Are you happy to pour again?
I'm more than happy to pour.
Good man. Thank you very much.
I like control.
So here is our very latest bottling. And it's super special stuff. It's a very, very small batch, just 1,500 bottles. And unlike the other whiskies that we've just been tasting, and our kind of core, or kind of more available expressions like Flagship, Moscatel finish, STR finish, this is, a very rare beast. So it's got some key differences to the other whiskies that we've done. Number one is the ABV. The strength is much higher. So this is 55%. And its other major difference is that it is a combination of full term matured sherry casks and bourbon casks together. Just very quickly, we can just show anybody watching some of the different cask types here. So we've got a bourbon barrel. Okay. It's a 200 litre first fill bourbon barrel. So we're filling 14 of these a week, typically. In the middle here, we have a Fino sherry hogshead. Bigger cask, 250 litre. You can see it's kind of on its end, it's higher than these. And then we've got this absolute monster of a cask here, which is a Oloroso sherry butts. And so that would hold, I believe that cask in particular is about 530 litres capacity. So it's a big old cask. We had to forklift it around here yesterday. It's not as heavy as it was when it filled, because actually I used some of this in the very whiskey that you're tasting. So we filled some of these beautiful sherry butts back in 2016, and they're at the heart of the Yorkshire Day 2021 release.
Well, you can. The clue is there in the colour, isn't it? I mean, because you guys don't colour your whiskies at all, do you?
No, absolutely not.
And you can, immediately on the nose, a lovely stewed fruit, dried fruit. I'm going to try it at full strength, even though it's 55%.
I'm in already.
Yes, that's right up my alley. Anyone who knows me, I do love a sherry cask whiskey. Obviously, it has to be of good quality, but yeah, that's lovely. It's really intense, very that old adage, the sort of Christmas pudding or Christmas cake with brandy butter, and really, if you like that style of whiskey, that's going to hit a lot of the right spots, isn't it?
It's just so different to Flagship that we started with.
Oh, yeah.
It's a completely different whiskey. It just is. It's a nice little exercise. Just if you've worked through the tasting pack as we've been walking around, okay, we're a single malt whiskey distillery, but any single malt whiskey distillery is not tied to one flavour profile. You can use cask, you can use your distillation process, you can use many different parts of whiskey making to drive flavour in different ways. And in this case, we're really seeing what these kind of exceptional sherry casks can bring to the party. So it is some of our oldest whiskey, 2016 casks, really, which obviously we're not an ancient distillery, fair to say. First production was in 2016, but yeah, it's a really nice little snapshot into those beautiful old casks.
Yeah, and it's incredible. I mean, you taste that 5 years old, roughly speaking, and it certainly doesn't taste like what you might think a 5-year-old whiskey would taste like. And I
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Again, David and I were talking about age statements, non-age statements. And the fact that these days, because of the work of yourselves and many others, on almost dispelling the myth that without an age statement it can't be any good, and because of things that are happening in Japan and Taiwan and all over the world, this kind of attitude of if it doesn't say 10-year-old on it or 15-year-old, then it can't be any good. All the whiskey we've tried so far today also does a great job of dispelling that.
Yeah, well, I'm very pleased to hear that. We work really hard to make sure that everything that we're releasing is tasting good. We believe it's great whiskey. We wouldn't put it in a bottle if we weren't prepared to sit down, enjoy it, drink it. That's absolutely crucial. It's such an important part of it. And yeah, you're right. I think that dispelling that myth really, really important, and a lot of really good work from a lot of very, very, very good, very upcoming whiskey distilleries doing that. All banging the same drum. Making great whiskey that people can drink. That is, at the younger age of the spectrum, for sure.
Good stuff.
You've got a little breather after this session. Yeah, we're gonna be back here with David Thompson. We're going to be talking about these casks in particular, and hearing about what his adventures into Spain and Kentucky, back in the ideas of the distillery. Okay. So
I look forward to that. I'll definitely be watching. Yeah. I'll try not to put him off.
Tune in. Well, it's like you could sit just there, just keep sipping whiskey and laugh heartily at these tales. There's some good stories there.
I bet.
But yeah, if you want to join us again, we'll be back here in roughly 10 minutes' time. And if you've got any questions on casks and maturation, that kind of thing, we can go into those in that session. Hopefully you enjoyed that, Eddie.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It's a little walk around the distillery.
Yeah, but it's good to hear everything from the horse's mouth and go into a little bit more detail here and there.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, no, thank you, Joe. That was brilliant. Hope you all enjoyed it at home.
Very good.
And we'll see you back in about 5-10 minutes, something like that.
Great stuff.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching. Cheers.